This is a motion analysis on the baseball pitch. In this first view, the camera is to the right of the pitcher. After the pitcher steps into position, he will begin the wind-up phase. The initial movements seen in this wind-up phase are left hip flexion as well as left knee flexion to 90 degrees. After that, the pitcher extends his knee to about 5 degrees before the ball leaves the other hand. From here, the left hip externally rotates before planting on the ground, and the right arm comes overhead, throwing the ball forward. The pitcher is using his right arm to throw the ball. In the right glenohumeral joint, the movement will begin with shoulder abduction and external rotation. Here, the pitcher bends his right humeral ulnar joint to 90 degrees before the shoulder begins moving. After the pitcher extends his right humeral ulnar joint to 5 degrees, he begins to abduct his right glenohumeral joint to 90 degrees, as well as externally rotate his right glenohumeral joint to about -30 degrees. The time period from when shoulder abduction begins and shoulder external rotation begins to when it reaches its maximum abduction and external rotation is called the early cocking period. When the shoulder is at maximal external rotation and abduction, the elbow is bent at 90 degrees. The next phase of the throwing motion is acceleration. The acceleration phase begins with shoulder internal rotation as well as adduction and elbow extension. As the pitcher reaches the end of the cocking phase, notice the rapid shoulder internal rotation and adduction. The acceleration phase ends when the ball is released. In this second view, the pitcher is facing the camera. Here, the pitcher's right hip is abducting and his left hip is externally rotating to step into his pitching motion. We then can see left hip flexion to 80 degrees as well as left knee flexion to 90 degrees before it extends out to 5 degrees. The left hip then externally rotates to prepare to plant the left foot into the ground. Notice the trunk rotation throughout the pitching motion. This is one way the pitcher generates power in his throw. The pitcher also generates power through internal rotation in the shoulder seen here. The right hip external rotation seen here is performed mainly by the piriformis and gemellus superior and inferior. The counterclockwise trunk rotation seen here is performed mainly by the external obliques and aided by the internal obliques. Here, dual arm abduction is performed by the supraspinatus up to 30 degrees, and then the medial deltoids take over. As the trunk continues to rotate counterclockwise, the right arm extends, which is facilitated by the triceps muscle. Here, you can begin to see the arm internally rotate. The arm internally rotates because of the contractions in the subscapularis and the supraspinatus. Once the ball is released, the arm is decelerated by the biceps brachii and the brachialis. Again, he begins by abducting his left hip as well as externally rotating his right hip, then flexing his left knee to 90 and externally rotate to prepare to plant his front foot. Here we begin to see the right shoulder abduct as soon as the ball leaves the other hand. The shoulder also will externally rotate as seen here. Notice the forearm fully pronated at the end of the throwing motion. The glenohumeral abduction seen here is performed by the supraspinatus as well as the deltoids, and the adduction is performed by the pec major, latissimus dorsi, and teres major. The left hip external rotation that can be observed here is performed by the gluteus minimus and the piriformis. The right hip internal rotation that can be seen here is facilitated by the gluteus medius and the tensor fasciae latae. In this video, the camera is to the left of the pitcher. The pitcher abducts his left hip and externally rotates his right hip to step into the pitching motion. Here we can see the pitcher extend his left knee before externally rotating and planting into his throwing motion. The hip flexion in the left hip that can be seen here is performed by the psoas, the tensor fasciae latae, and the rectus femoris. As the pitcher enters his follow-through, notice his right ankle is plantar flexed. This is performed by the gastroc muscle. Here, the pitcher will begin to abduct his shoulders, which are performed by the supraspinatus muscle and the deltoid muscles. Then we see rapid internal rotation. This is performed by subscapularis and pec major. Again, the forearm is fully pronated at the end of the motion. During the deceleration phase of this motion, the extensor group in the forearm as well as the bicep help decelerate the arm. The rapid internal rotation and adduction of the shoulder as well as counterclockwise trunk rotation add force to the throw. The external rotation of the shoulder is about -30 degrees and the elbow is flexed to about 90 degrees, which is within the normal range. In this angle, we will first see the initial wind-up phase. The pitcher externally rotates his shoulder to -30 degrees as well as abducts his shoulder to 90 degrees. You can also see the plantar flexion of the right ankle. The pitcher's right forearm is pronated throughout the entire movement, and his elbow is flexed at 90 degrees as he throws the ball, and his trunk rotates counterclockwise. The right shoulder external rotation that can be seen here is performed by the infraspinatus, teres minor, and the posterior deltoid. The pronation of the forearm throughout the movement is facilitated by the pronator teres, which is at approximately 60 to 90 degrees of pronation when the ball is released. The left knee flexion that can be seen here is performed by the hamstrings. The elbow extension seen here is performed by the tricep, which helps accelerate the arm. The follow-through is controlled by eccentric actions of the rhomboids, the trapezius, the infraspinatus, supraspinatus, the long head of the bicep, as well as the quadratus lumborum. Notice the balance between the pitcher's arms as he throws the ball. Some potential areas for improvement were observed during the analysis. The first area of improvement that was observed was that the pitcher could have more of a follow through with the pitching arm. Notice how the pitcher pulls short during his follow through. The pitcher will stop his trunk rotation, which will restrict his follow through with his pitching arm, as seen here. Another potential area of improvement that can be seen is that the pitcher could lift the back plant leg more while rotating, which will also reduce the risk of injury. Reducing ankle rotation will reduce risk of injury. The final area of improvement that was observed was that the pitcher should continue to rotate his trunk counterclockwise during the follow-through. Here, you can see the pitcher stop trunk rotation, which will take power away from the throw.